The sun rose lazily over our little suburban enclave, painting the sky with soft hues of purple and orange. It was a typical morning in the neighborhood, the kind of peaceful start that made one believe in the goodness of the world. I watched the day unfold from my kitchen window, sipping my coffee and relishing the tranquility. Our street was a portrait of idyllic suburban life, with its manicured lawns and white picket fences. It felt like a safe haven, a place where children laughed freely, their voices mingling with the chirping of the birds. I wanted to keep it that way, for my kids, for all of us. Joy is a chalk drawing on the sidewalk. My children often adorn the pavement with their colorful art, their imagination spilling into swirling rainbows and smiling suns. It was innocence on concrete, but not everyone appreciated such whimsical displays. Enter Karen, the self-appointed overseer of our homeowners association. She was a woman who wore authority like armor, her eyes ever scanning for deviations from the unspoken rules she clung to. She had developed an uncanny knack for transforming the mundane into the intolerable. Her gaze was sharp and critical, like a hawk hunting for prey amidst a sea of conformity. The first time she approached our driveway, I was tending to the garden. Her footsteps were precise, each one a soldier's march. She carried a clipboard, her shield and sword in one. When she spoke, it was with the measured cadence of someone who rarely allowed for argument. Her issue? The chalk art. It was just children's play, a few colorful scribbles that would vanish with the next rain. But to Karen it was an affront, a disruption of the HOA's sterile aesthetic. I listened, nodding occasionally, letting her words wash over me without reaction. Inside, though, a quiet resolve was forming. I was not about to let her snuff out the joy my children found in their art. After she left, I resumed my gardening, the sun warming my back. It was easy to let her words drift away like dandelion seeds on the breeze. I had no intention of escalating the situation. I wanted peace. Yet, her presence lingered in the neighborhood like a shadow, her grievances a constant undertone to our lives. She began to patrol the street more frequently, her disapproval as palpable as the sun's glare on a summer's day. She left notes, small, passive-aggressive slips of paper tucked under windshield wipers or nestled in mailboxes. They were reminders of her watchful eye. Each note was a whisper of her intent, a reminder that she was always there, just out of sight. I found them infuriatingly amusing. Did she truly believe these little paper soldiers would win her war on chalk? Still, I pondered. What drove her? Was it simply the intoxication of power, however small? Perhaps an attempt to mold the world to her liking. I couldn't be sure. Her motivations remained as elusive as a breeze that stirred the leaves, but remained unseen. Despite her efforts, I held my ground calmly. I continued to encourage my children to create, to paint the world as they saw it. I would not let her take that from them. This was our neighborhood too. The days passed, each one an unspoken test of wills. I wondered how long this would continue. Her persistence was admirable in a sense, but so was mine. In the quiet moments, I would watch my children play, bright chalk in hand, and feel a quiet strength growing within me. For now, the chalk remained, and so did my resolve. Little did Karen know, her spotlight on our small transgressions would soon illuminate more than she ever anticipated. The morning after Karen's outburst about our kids' chalk art, I awoke to an insidious silence. It wasn't that the usual sounds of suburban life were absent. In fact, the neighborhood was alive with its typical Saturday rhythms. Lawnmowers hummed, dogs barked, and sprinklers hissed in their cyclical spitting. But beneath it all, there was an unsettling quiet, the kind that follows a storm more threatening than it appeared. I walked out to retrieve the paper, feeling the dew soak into my slippers as the sun poured over the rooftops, gilding the rows of identical houses. My eyes caught the faint remnants of chalk rainbows on our driveway, smudged but still defiantly cheerful. They seemed to whisper an innocent resistance against the absurdity that had unfolded. In the mailbox, nestled between promotional flyers and bills, was a pristine envelope from the HOA. I recognized Karen's handwriting, immaculate and looped, the sort that spoke of a person who poured more care into appearances than substance. The letter inside was a masterpiece of pettiness, an official citation for unauthorized use of sidewalk space and defacing property with temporary substances. The absurdity of it all made me chuckle, a hollow sound against the calm morning. I imagined Karen on her porch, watching with hawk-eyed intensity as the world failed to align with her vision of sterile perfection. Still chuckling, I scanned the letter. It was a declaration of war camouflaged as a bureaucratic memo. Her rules, like incantations from a high priestess of a cult of conformity, were absurdly specific. Grass length within a quarter-inch tolerance, holiday decorations within a prescribed color palette. But it was the latest addition that caught my attention. No chalk art on driveways or sidewalks. A rule seemingly birthed overnight, as if Karen had inscribed it into the HOA commandments in a fit of authoritarian zeal. As I folded the letter, my mind wandered back to Karen's eyes, how they gleamed with a kind of self-righteous fire when she confronted us. Her smile didn't reach them, a facade that papered over cracks of insecurity and loneliness. It was easy to picture her rallying a small faction of like-minded enforcers, a clandestine cabal of the easily aggrieved. Rumors began trickling through the grapevine, whispers carried on the wind like the distant ringing of wind chimes. Karen was spreading tales of our supposed disregard for community standards, painting us as renegades in her ordered world. Her narratives had a way of sticking, like burrs, to the fur of gossiping tongues, pricking the ears of those eager for scandal. I felt the weight of her stories, even as neighbors gave sympathetic nods and tight-lipped smiles. Some avoided eye contact, as if my glance might unravel the fragile tapestry of their curated lives. Others offered sidelong glances, perhaps wondering if the chalk was still there, if it was a harbinger of domestic chaos. Karen's shadow loomed, casting long tendrils that entwined around the mundane rituals of daily life. Yet, beneath that shadow, a quiet resolve flickered. I knew what must be done. Subtlety would be my ally, irony my weapon. The chalk had drawn lines beyond art. It was a stage now set for a different kind of performance. The evening news awaited. The late afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting stripes across the living room floor. It was calm inside, a stark contrast to the turmoil outside the window. The quiet was deceptive, masking the storm brewing just beneath the surface of our suburban enclave. My mind was attuned to the rhythm of the ticking clock on the mantel. Each tick a reminder of time passing, each talk a call to action. For weeks, I'd been meticulously documenting every interaction with Karen. Each condescending note slipped under our door, each glare from across the driveway, each time she stood, arms crossed with a self-appointed authority, overseeing the neighborhood like a hawk. The chalk art had been the trigger, but it was the barely concealed malice in her eyes that fueled my resolve. I had kept a journal, detailed and chronological, a tapestry of every slight, every threat. My phone held images, dates and timestamps of my children's innocent drawings, hopscotch outlines, rainbows, and stars that had so offended her sense of order. The irony wasn't lost on me. The vivid colors and innocent doodles were such a stark contrast to the drab, gray rigidity of Karen's world. I decided to prepare a subtle counter. There was power in understatement. A friend at the local news station owed me a favor, a small debt from years past when friendships were seeds sown without expectation of harvest. I reached out, careful not to reveal too much too soon. The story needed to unfold naturally, not as a vendetta, but as a spotlight on an absurdity. On the appointed day, the neighborhood wore its Sunday best. Lawns mowed to military precision, flowers rigid in their beds, it all seemed to mock the chaos beneath the surface. I watched from my window as the news van pulled up, its presence a splash of color against the uniformity, much like the chalk art had been. Karen, ever vigilant, couldn't resist the allure of the spectacle. Her curiosity proved her undoing. She stepped from her pristine porch, a frown etched into her features as she approached. The camera crew, sensing a story, turned their lenses toward the unfolding drama. They had been briefed to expect an anecdote of community charm, but sometimes truth offers a different narrative. The reporter, a young woman with an air of practiced empathy, approached me first. Her questions were gentle nudges, designed to unravel the tale slowly. I spoke calmly, painting a picture with words, letting the absurdity of Karen's actions speak for itself. My children's innocence became the backdrop for a broader narrative, one of overreach and pettiness in the heart of suburbia. Karen, sensing the shift, tried to interject. Her voice, normally shrill with authority, wavered under the weight of the camera's gaze. Her single attempt at a rebuttal was swallowed in the silence that followed. The spectacle had turned, not a confrontation but an unveiling. In that moment, Karen was not the villain, just a woman exposed. Her rigidity, once her armor, now her prison, laid bare for the community to see. The irony was palpable. She had guarded her kingdom fiercely, yet it was she who had been caught in the spotlight of her own making. The evening news segment painted a portrait of our neighborhood's charm, anchored by an ironic twist. The story of chalk art and community spirit. It was lighthearted, yet sharp. A mirror to the folly of overreach. Karen's image, caught mid-glare, became an unwitting symbol of the small tyrannies that sometimes bloom in well-manicured lawns. As I tucked the children into bed that night, their whispers were filled with the tales of their new, unintended fame. The chalk drawings would remain, a testament to innocence and resilience amidst the rigidity of adult pretensions. And as I turned off the lights, I felt a quiet satisfaction settle in, a gentle, ironic victory etched in pastel hues on gray sidewalks. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of ember and amethyst, the neighborhood began to stir with an unspoken awareness. The tension was palpable, like the charged air before a summer storm. It hummed in the spaces between our houses, vibrating in the whispers of curtains drawn hastily as Karen's figure meandered down the sidewalk. The chalk art was still vivid on our driveway, a defiant burst of color against the encroaching dusk. My children had poured their hearts into those vibrant swirls and whimsical creatures, a joyous rebellion against the monochrome existence Karen tried to enforce. I watched from the window, the soft glow of the evening news casting a halo around me. Karen's footsteps were in a rhythmic beat against the pavement, each step echoing her relentless crusade for control. She had become a caricature of authority, her power as brittle as the crisp leaves that whispered in the trees. The neighborhood had started to notice the facade of her imperious charm, crumbling like old paint. There was a quiet understanding now, an unspoken alliance forming amongst us, the residents who had once feared her sharp tongue and pointed letters. We shared knowing glances over hedges and fences, the kind of silent communication that needed no words. We were all weary of her reign, ready for a change. The chalk was just the beginning. I felt the irony as I watched her pass my driveway, her eyes narrowing at the riot of colors. She was a storm in a teacup, all sound and fury, signifying nothing. My children had created something beautiful, something she could never erase, no matter how much she threatened or complained. It was our own David against her Goliath, and for once the odds felt even. The television droned on, the anchor's voice a steady cadence that soothed the edges of my nerves. They were covering local stories, the small-town dramas that sometimes seemed more pressing than global affairs. I smiled at the thought of Karen's face on the screen. Her tirades broadcast for everyone to see, her power stripped bare under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. A rustle at the edge of my vision caught my attention. It was Mrs. Thompson from 2 doors down, her wiry frame hunched against the chill evening air. She paused at the sidewalk, giving me a small nod, a gesture heavy with solidarity. We weren't alone in this. She too had felt Karen's wrath, her garden once a battleground over the height of her prized roses. Our eyes met, and in that shared glance, I felt the weight of community. We were the quiet force, the unyielding tide against Karen's brittle dam of authority. We had been patient, but now we were ready to act. I could sense the shift, the neighborhood's collective will gathering, like storm clouds, ready to burst. The evening news flickered, and Karen's face appeared, her name scrolling across the bottom of the screen. It was a moment suspended in time, the culmination of whispered conversations and hidden recordings. The anchor spoke of her antics, her threats, and the community's growing dissent. The truth was out, and it was liberating. I turned away, letting the moment wash over me. Outside, the twilight deepened, and the first stars pierced the inky sky. The neighborhood, once silent in its compliance, was now a chorus of quiet defiance. We were ready for whatever came next. Together. The air was heavy with anticipation, like the charged silence before a summer storm. I watched through a narrow slit in the blinds as the evening sun painted long shadows across the neighborhood. The world outside seemed unchanged, oblivious to the quiet upheaval that had been set in motion. Karen's threats had been like rain on a tin roof, loud and relentless. But every deluge meets its drain, and I had found mine. The legal papers were a simple envelope of white, unassuming yet powerful like a coiled spring. My children were inside, tucked away from the world's absurdities. There was a certain serenity in their laughter, in the way they continued to create their chalk masterpieces on the driveway despite the threats. They were mercifully unaware of the absurdity of grown-up feuds. It started small, of course. A call to an acquaintance, a lawyer friend with a knack for neighborhood disputes, who understood the dance of the legal world better than most. He laid out the steps like a chessboard, each move precise, deliberate. My involvement was minimal, advisory at best. His voice was calm, a river of reassurance flowing through the phone line late at night when I questioned the madness of it all. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. A cease and desist letter for harassment, a formal complaint to the HOA board for abuse of power, and a carefully crafted narrative for the local news, should things escalate further. The possibility of her behavior becoming a headline was a pressure point few could withstand. Karen had built her castle on a foundation of control and righteous authority. This would shake its very bedrock. The papers were delivered that afternoon. A singular moment of reckoning sealed within 6 inches of white paper. I watched as the courier, a robust man who seemed oddly at home in the chaos of the world, handed them over. Karen stood at her doorstep, her expression a mix of confusion and indignation. She took the envelope with a pinched look like she'd bitten into a lemon by mistake. It was the beginning of an unraveling. I could feel it, a subtle shift in the air, a change as profound as the first cool breeze of autumn. Her facade, always so meticulously maintained, began to crack. The neighborhood watched, eyes discreetly peeking through curtains, the air thick with whispered speculations. I pondered the irony. Karen had always been the self-proclaimed guardian of order, the enforcer of rules. Yet now, the very structure she championed was turning its gaze upon her. There was a certain poetic justice in it all, a reminder that control, when wielded without compassion, can swiftly become one's undoing. I never intended for it to become a public spectacle. It was a quiet defense, a restrained retaliation. Yet, the neighborhood thrived on drama like bees to nectar, and whispers traveled faster than any post. Within days, the HOA called an emergency meeting. The board members, once complicit in Karen's reign, were swift to distance themselves from her sinking ship. I attended the meeting with a composed demeanor, as though I were simply observing the final act of a long-standing play. Karen stood at the center, her voice a high-pitched protest, each word a desperate attempt to reel back control. But the tide had turned. The community had become a jury, and the verdict was no longer hers to decide. As I left the meeting, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gray. The streetlights flickered to life, one by one, as if acknowledging a new chapter in our neighborhood's story. I walked home with a sense of quiet resolution, my children's laughter echoing in the distance, a melody of innocence that outshined any shadow of discord. Justice, I realized, isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers its arrival, subtle and profound, like the first hint of dawn after a long, dark night. The sun dipped low behind the houses, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the quiet streets. The air felt charged with something electric, something final. The evening news van sat parked at the entrance of our neighborhood, a beacon of the imminent reckoning. I watched from my driveway, deliberately invisible, shrouded by the whispers of dusk. The community had gathered, drawn out by curiosity and pent-up frustration. They milled about with the restless energy of people who had finally found a voice. Karen, the self-appointed queen of our homeowners association, stood off to the side, her face a mask of defiance and disbelief. She was a statue in a garden of murmuring leaves, denying the storm that had gathered above her. It felt poetic, the kind of justice that unfolds in slow motion, where every second is laden with the weight of what was and what could be. I thought of my children, their chalk art wiped away by Karen's iron will. Her threats had been etched into our lives like unkind graffiti. But now, the tables had turned. They had spun with a quiet elegance, a pirouette of cause and effect. The news crew set up with military precision, cameras pointed like sentinels ready to capture the truth. I could feel the community's collective breath, held in a suspension of anticipation. The lens of the camera became a spotlight, illuminating the cracks in Karen's facade. It was the kind of exposure she had always craved, but never under these circumstances. I moved closer, blending into the periphery of the crowd. There was strength in our numbers, a tapestry of resolve woven together through shared experiences. As the reporter began her piece, I felt a tremor of satisfaction, a ripple of vindication. The scandal of Karen's tyranny was laid bare, each word peeling back layers of deceit and manipulation. Her reign had been built on the fragile foundation of intimidation, and now it crumbled beneath the weight of its own hubris. Karen shifted her stance, a small, involuntary movement that betrayed the cracks in her armor. Her eyes darted like trapped birds, searching for escape. But there was none. Not now. Not here. The crowd was silent, a living tapestry of quiet defiance. It was as if we had reached a collective understanding, an unspoken agreement that her time was up. We were witnesses to her unmasking, a Greek chorus no longer voiceless. The irony was sharp enough to cut. The woman who had once demanded conformity now stood isolated, her power dissolved in the harsh light of truth. She had always been loud, drowning out dissent with her shrill declarations, but now her silence was deafening, a void where authority had once been. A small breeze tugged at my hair, a gentle reminder of the world outside this brief moment of upheaval. The kids would be home soon, eager to return to the comfort of their chalk art and the innocence of summer evenings. They would never fully understand this day, nor should they. It was enough that they could create without fear. The reporter wrapped up her segment with a final flourish, the camera lingering on Karen for a moment longer than necessary. It was a tableau of consequences, a pause before the inevitable change. As the crowd began to disperse, I caught Karen's eye. It was a fleeting connection, a bridge built from the rubble of her authority. There was no triumph in my gaze, just a quiet acknowledgement that justice, though delayed, had arrived. I turned away, walking back up the driveway, my steps lighter than they had been in months. Behind me, the neighborhood exhaled, the air lighter, the streets kinder. The world felt righted, the balance restored. Karen's reign had ended not with a bang, but with the soft, insistent whisper of truth, and that was enough.